I find it comical that twice we've had to rearrange our winter schedule because of winter weather, but glad to be back here. So this is the Bible and ancient history. Last week, 2 weeks ago, we started off with a lot of prerequisites and preconceived notions that you have to have. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and open up with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you for your word, and we thank you for just who you are and how you have led and how you are leading, how you guide and direct history for your will, and how even in small parts you allow us to be part of your ultimate story, Lord. And I just ask that you would help this class to be a blessing to those that are here, and that they would be able to use this to apply things to their lives. And asking in your Son's name, amen. All right, and so last week, some of the things that we talked about, and just in a little bit of review, is understanding what our mindset, what our philosophy should be towards the Bible. The big thing that we spent a lot of time discussing, or well, I spent a lot of time talking about, you sat and listened, was that we have to believe the Bible. That as you go through, if you start doing any of your own research or your own study into these topics, you are going to find a lot of different things, a lot of different opinions, whether they are from credible sources or somebody just, they took a class one time and so they're talking about things on the internet, or archaeologists and different things, and they're going to be contradicting what the Bible says. But right at the very beginning, we have to have truly the preconceived notion that the Bible is true and that we are going to believe the Bible. The next thing one of the things that we looked at is some of the quotes from historians, and one of them was from Napoleon Bonaparte, that even if ancient history is not true, we have to believe it. Because as I was talking about, and we'll discuss this a little bit more next week, a lot of ancient historians, that was not their day job. Herodotus, the father of history, one that we look to, and we would not have hundreds of years of information about the world if it wasn't for what he wrote. But the problem was, Herodotus was writing in such a way in order to sell his histories, to sell his stories, so that they could be put on as plays or different things like that, and he wanted to make money. Well, boring books don't usually sell well. And so if a story was boring, he had no problem making it a little bit more exciting in order to help with the sales. He wanted to, be on Athens' top 100 best-selling lists kind of thing, is what he was looking for there. And so whereas we look at the Bible and we look and we say, yes, I'm going to choose to believe this because it is God's word, unfortunately with ancient history and a lot of things there, we have to choose to believe it because it's the only historical record we have. Even though it is extra-biblical, it's outside the Bible, that's what we have when we're believing there. And so we discussed those different prerequisites. Well, this week we're getting into the actual Bible and some of the things there that we're dealing with. And so behind me, over here on my left, is a circular chart of world and biblical events, and that's on there. And then over here on my right is a linear chart. And a couple of things I want to point out. I like this chart because I can fit it on my wall relatively easily. I mean, it's still pretty big and everything. But it's difficult to read. It's not as easy. The print's a little bit smaller and everything. So it has its downsides and everything. I like this one because it's easy to read. It's linear, but it's 30 feet long, and so it doesn't fit on my wall very well and everything there. So with those different things, so I'm going to move over just a little and kind of point out a couple of things with this chart, and I'm going to move the mic with me. Today, oh my goodness, sorry about that. Today we're going to be discussing some of the things dealing with the flood. Now, we'll get into this in just a moment, but this timeline here is based off of the research of a man named Ussher. He was a 15th century Irish priest, bishop, who did a lot of the research and going through there. And again, we'll talk about some of the stuff in just a second of where he would have got his dates and different things there. But he theorizes that the world was created 4,004 years before Christ was born. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all of the details of where he got those dates in this class. I watched a 27-minute video just on that this past week, and so if you want that video, I'll give it to you, but I only have 27 minutes total, so I can't just spend 27 minutes talking about where he got the year 4004. But one thing to notice, from the beginning here, all the way on the right, you have Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and then when you get to here, this black line, this is Noah's flood that takes place there. And so this linear line here, again, it goes another 20 feet that way. This linear outline, this timeline here of human events goes through, and everything is spaced out evenly. And so one thing I think a lot of times that we forget and we don't realize, and we'll look at this on our slides in a moment, is the amount of time and the amount of human history that took place before the flood that was there. And so just thinking of that, keeping that in mind, let's go ahead and start discussing some of the stuff with the slides. First of all, a term that you are probably familiar with. Oh, no. Come on now, little guy. You can do it. Let's see. No? Yes, go ahead. Thank you. Okay, so go ahead to the next one there. Prehistory or prehistoric. What does that mean when it says prehistory or prehistoric? What is somebody talking about? It's a term that comes up very often in either history or archaeology. But somebody says in prehistoric times. What are they talking about? Yes? Okay, exactly. Before anything was written down. Really, if you just take the word apart, it's before history took place. So what is the most common animal that is associated with prehistoric times? Dinosaurs, yes. And this is a very easy, really lie to fall into, is the idea of prehistoric. Because they look at this, and you have the prehistoric times, and it's all throughout history and archaeology, you have it there. So you have prehistoric times of dinosaurs, then you have man, then you have, the rest of history that goes on there. Prehistory or prehistoric is a lie. Because history started in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, when God created the heavens and the earth. And so that's something we have to understand there. And if you've always had the mindset, even not that you're looking at it through an evolutionary mindset, but if you've had the mindset of prehistoric times or prehistoric creatures or animals, things like that, it's difficult to kind of change your thinking a little bit to think, wait a second, those aren't prehistoric. Those were around when people were around. And history started in Genesis 1:1, so there's no such thing as prehistory. And so keep that in mind as we go along. Now, so we go through there and talk about it. Let's see. They did some things back there. Let's see. Nope. So, all right. So then we get to creation and the flood. As I was talking about a little bit over here. So with the creation and the flood, both of them are beginnings. You have creation where history began. And then as we see over here, there was about 1,500 years, and I'm rounding, about 1,500 years of human events and human history before the flood happened. Unfortunately, as Christians, we don't often think about that way. Because in Genesis chapter 5 is when the flood happens. And so if we look at it and say, well, it's the very beginning of the book, so not much stuff must have happened, is the way we accidentally think about it. But you think between 1,000 to 1,500 years of history, what happened? Like, what took place during that time? What technology was invented? What happened there? Now, I'm not saying, that the History Channel has taken a huge nosedive off the deep end, like the past 15 years. It's really kind of sad. One of their most famous, or not, well, infamous, let me say it that way, but popular shows for a while was a show called Ancient Aliens, where the idea was that these ancient societies couldn't have done what they did without help from extraterrestrials, and it went for like 7 seasons kind of thing. And I was just like, stop it, it's ridiculous. Okay, anyway, we're not going to get off on that tangent, but thinking about even today, now I'm not talking that they may have had computers and processing and things like that, but imagine the amount of technology that people could have had for 1,500 years when you yourself were living for 800 years. And so that's what was happening there. They were going through, and they would have been creating, they would have been developing, they would have going through there. And so when the flood happened, historically speaking and biblically speaking, that was catastrophic. Not just for society, like, millions of people dying, but as a whole, just for technology, it all was wiped out. And so the question may come up, well, Pastor Rogers, then, if all of that great technology was there, and I have no idea what it was. Again, I'm not saying they had processors, but they would have been advanced. Why then, when the flood happened, why didn't technology just keep going? And with something like that, we can see actually very easily through history several times where there's been major technological advancements and advanced societies for their time, and then a fall happened, and then it all fell apart. One of them was, we're going to talk about this, was the ancient cities of Babylon and Persia and the Assyrians that they had there. Back in between the Testaments, there was battles going on, and there was a group of mercenaries from Greece that were hired to fight for Persia and in the land there. Well, they went, and the guy that hired them actually ended up dying, so they had to make their way back to Greece because they were in enemy territory at that point. And so they're going along, and they camp outside this city, and the walls are massively high. They are massively thick. And the commander of the military unit that was there was writing his history about this. And I cannot remember the name. It's a very Greek-sounding name, and if I heard it, I could say, yes, that's it. But what he was doing, he was recording, and in his histories, he was looking, and they had nothing like those walls or those cities back in ancient Greece. He had never seen anything like them, but they were in complete ruins, completely destroyed. And so according to what he was saying, it's like it had to have been giants that created this. There's no way mankind made this. They were camped outside the city walls of Babylon. And that's what they'd seen there, where this ancient, relatively speaking, technologically advanced city was able to create this, and then at the fall of Babylon, those ideas were lost. We see this again when the Roman Empire fell apart and Europe breaks apart, and the aqueducts and indoor plumbing and different things like that wouldn't be seen again in Europe for hundreds of years. And so we see the same thing would have happened after the flood. They would have had to restart there. You can go to the next slide there if you would. And so we're going to look here specifically at the creation account. So creation here, as I mentioned, there are two major ideas of when the year creation happened. So go ahead and the next one there. There's the Jewish year here that we have. And so the Jewish idea that we have, let's see, went too far on my own notes there, is the year 3761 BC or thereabouts. In more modern archaeological finds and whatnot, that fluctuates just a little bit, but for the number there, 3761 BC. Now, I have there BC, and then in parentheses, I have BCE. Now, the reason I have both of those, actually I have three of them up there, I'm going to talk about all three of them. The reason I have all three of them is because we as conservative Christians look at the first one, and that's the date we would use, the naming of the date, BC. What does BC stand for? Before Christ. All right, so it's before Christ there. So 3,761 years before Christ was born, the Jewish calendar looks as that's when the world was created. But then in the parentheses there next is BCE. And if you've done any type of archaeological or historical study over the past 20 years or so, this is the number that's becoming more and more prevalent. BCE stands for before Common Era. And that is what Jews would use for their dating time. So if you went onto a Jewish website or something like that, you would see 3761 BCE. Because not just the Jews, but secular archaeology and secular history as a whole is trying to do as many things as they can to remove Christ, to remove religion out of their teachings there. This is just one small way to do that. And it's a sneaky way to do it, because if you are not informed, you say, oh, it's just BCE, not realizing what's going on there. Then you have AM1. AM1 there stands for Anno Mundi. Does anybody remember their Latin classes? Anno Mundi. Anno Mundi means in the year of the world. In the year of the world. So the world would have been roughly 1 year old at this point. Technically 0 because it was when it was created, but you know what I'm saying there. So AM is Anno Mundi. Now after Christ was born, we as conservative Christians go from BC to AD. That is Anno Domini, which is in the year of our Lord. Now, modern individuals use the word CE, or not the word, they use the classification CE, meaning Common Era. So BCE, before Common Era, and then after Christ was born, they use CE, or Common Era. So that's what we have there. But if you see AD, that is Anno Domini, it does not stand for after death, which would be really cool if it worked out, but then you'd be losing about 33 years of history in between, so it doesn't quite work that well. Again, would be super cool if it worked that way, but it doesn't. So we have it there. Now, the Christian, as I mentioned here, is dealing with around the year 4004 BC. And I have here notes on why those years are different, and also about a 30-minute video that you could watch if you want to see it. Very informative video, but going through, I'm going to just do a little bit of history here, a little bit of years of what's going on. So they believe, the Jewish scholars believe, that the Exodus took place about 480 years before Solomon's temple, which, as far as we can tell, happened in the year 1310 BC. So you back up 480 years from that, and then Solomon's temple was, so you have Solomon's. Let me do it a little bit differently. We're going to start at the second temple. That'll be easier. So the second temple, Herod's temple, was destroyed in the year AD 70. So that was when the Romans came in, finally destroyed, in their mind, the people group of the Israelites. Israel was no longer a nation, no longer in the area today what we consider Israel, and they were just scattered everywhere in the year AD 70. The second temple was built 420 years before that. And then you back up, you have the 70 years of captivity, you have Solomon's temple being destroyed, back up more, Solomon's temple being built, and then the Exodus was 480 years before that. Then the early Jewish rabbis, with the timing and everything, eventually came up with the year 3761. And then the Christian, which this one is based off of here, both of these with Usher, is the year 4004. Now, I'm going to get done with this really boring stuff in just a second, so stick with me. All right? So the reason we have some disagreements between these dates, turn to Exodus 12, verse 40, please. Exodus 12, verse 40. Now, with the dates that I have up behind me, there are disagreements here between traditional Jewish dates and traditional conservative Christian dates. But if you begin researching the Jewish dates, you will find about 75 different ones. If you begin researching the Christian dates, even conservative sides, you'll find about 75 different specific dates for when creation happened. And so we have to land on one of them. But here we'll see some of the discrepancy of why it's here. So Exodus chapter 12, verse 40. It says, in the ESV, it says, the time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. Early rabbis believe that that has actually been mistranslated, misinterpreted. That they were not in Egypt for 430 years, but that Abraham, when he first moved into the land of Canaan, after he came from Ur and that area there, that when he moved into the land of Canaan to the point of the Exodus, that was 430 years. And Usher, the gentleman that did this timeline here, believes that. He agrees with that there should have been an extra, that it's not the time in Egypt was 430, but the time from Canaan and Egypt was that time period there. And so you get the discrepancy with what's going on there. But since they both agree, what happens? Well, Usher adds 60 years in between the time of Noah and Abraham. And he said that the understanding and the translating of it, that Abram's father was actually 130 when he had Abraham, not 70 years old, and then another 47 years to the temple period. And the difference there is because when he was doing his research and everything, they had a little bit more archaeological evidence than the early rabbis did when they made their estimates. So again, it's difficult to know which one it is. And I believe that as conservative Christians, you could agree with either one of these. You look at 4004 BC, you look at 3761 BC. Either one, I am not going to fight you on it, kind of thing. Because mainly, this is one of the things that, as I mentioned, that is not in the Bible. We know when the world was created. We know that the world was created. We know in Genesis 1:1 that God did it. He made it out of nothing. And we know that. We understand that. The date, if it was important enough for us to argue and get upset about whether Jewish or Christian, then God would have told us with something like this. And so also the date of the creation of the world does not really affect one way or the other what we're going to be talking about later, because we aren't exactly sure how long things happen in between there. But so we have that there. So looking at that, let's go ahead to the next slide. We go to the flood. Now, go ahead to the next one there. With the flood, there is also an early date and a late date for this. Why? I don't know, because people don't like to agree, and they make it difficult for people like me who want to do these growth classes and make it simple. But they just don't let me do it. All right? And so we don't know. There's early dates there. I tried looking up what the early date was, and I couldn't even find that. But just know that there are individuals that say that the flood took place earlier. And then we go to the next one, the late date. This is the one we would agree with, or that seems the most logical, is 2348 BC. So the reason we need to talk about the flood is because everything was wiped out at that point. It was a fresh start, new beginning. God did it with mankind and Noah's family. And then not only that, what happened there, but again, technologically, society, everything was brand new when Noah's Ark went on the mountain, and the people came out and the animals came out there. So we have that understanding, we have that availability to know that that's going to go there. From the point of the flood, again, we're not exactly sure the date, but this is the one we're going to kind of settle on here, because you have to have a date to start somewhere, that we go through there. Turn in your Bibles to Genesis 5. So you're in Exodus 12. Turn back to Genesis 5. Here we see in Genesis 5 some of the things that make this a little bit difficult with dating. Now, I want to be careful here that when I say some of these things here, that I'm not looking at the Bible and saying that the people purposely wrote something weird or misleading or anything like that. I'm just pointing out different things that are there. Again, taking from the preconceived notion, the preconception, that we are believing the Bible. The dates that we have here, the numbers that we have here, we are believing them. But if you look there in verse 3, and I'm going to skip through the verses, because I don't want, as enjoyable and as fun as it probably would be to read through the next 15 verses and all these names and numbers, I'm just going to skip through them. So verse 3, we see that Adam was 130 years when he had Seth. And then after this, Seth was 800 years, verse 4. And then verse 5, Adam died at 930. Seth was 105, verse 6, when he had Enosh. And then you go a little bit further, verse 9, Enosh was 90 when he had Kenan. Verse 12, Kenan was 70 when he had Mahalalel. And verse 15, Mahalalel was 65 when he had Jared. Jump down, verse 18, Jared was 162. He was a late bloomer when he had Enoch. And then you go through there, and Enoch actually did not die. He was one of the individuals in Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Fame of Faith, or the Heroes of Faith there. This says that he walked with God, and God took him. And I want to pause just for a moment and talk about Enoch for just a little bit. I've been going through a study of Hebrews 11 with our students in chapel. And to realize that when you look at Hebrews chapter 11, you have warriors in there, you have politicians, you have Abel, who was murdered for his faith and all this stuff. And then you have Enoch, and it says he walked by faith. And from a human perspective, that looks pretty boring. All right? Again, Abel was martyred for his faith. Other people later on in the chapter says they were sawn asunder. They were cut in half because of the faith that they held in God. Abraham was the father of the Israelite people. Then you have Noah, who saved everyone because he made the ark. And Enoch walked with God. But imagine how personal that relationship would have been with God. What it would have looked like for God to say, you know what, our relationship is so wonderful, I'm just going to take you home. And God shows us these individuals on purpose. He tells us these stories, these real events, that Enoch, even though his relationship with the Lord would have been, and why he's in the Hebrews chapter 11, would have seemed on a human level kind of, simple. At the same time, this is an amazing testimony about this man, that God looked at that. And so he went there, and says, verse 24, says, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Again, also remember, the Bible is a historical book. These are actually happened. And so part of me wonders, what was this like? Now, not what was it like for Enoch. If you think of the story of Elijah, he was taken up in a fiery chariot up into heaven, and he didn't die. And it's an incredible scene. And Elisha saw that to make sure that God made sure that Elisha knew that God was with him and all these things here. And it's an incredible scene here. But here it seems kind of calm and peaceful. Enoch was out one day and was taken. But what did Enoch's wife think? Or his family? He's like, I sent that guy to get milk like 7 days ago and he's still not back. Kind of thing. Like, I don't know what it looked like, but it's one of those things there. Again, this actually happened. And so what did that look like? I don't know. Just fun to think about. And then, let's see. Enoch had Methuselah in verse 25. And then Methuselah had Lamech in verse 25 there. Then we see verse 28, Lamech fathered Noah. So if we go to the next slide, we see all of these things laid out for us. So let's see, is it the next slide? Oh, that slide's not supposed to be there. Click through that one. There we go, figuring out the date. So here is a chart, God creating everything, year 0, and then you start adding up these different years. Year 0, Adam lived for 130 years before he had Seth, and then you have Enosh, and then Kenan, and then Mahalalel, and going through, then we go to the next one, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and then Noah. So based off of those years, we get that the flood probably took place around 1656 as the age of the earth, or the Anno Mundi, is most likely when the flood happened. Which, again, 1,500 years of human history took place in there. What in the world were they doing in there? We don't know what kind of technology they had, but at the same time, it was wicked enough that God said, these people are done. I'm done, I'm starting over with them, is what we have there. And so, looking at that and understanding is a pretty big deal. So after the flood takes place, we go ahead to the next slide, and we get to the... Oh, that was all supposed to pop up at once. All right, go ahead. Oh, it did. Okay, good. All right. Go to the next one there, is dealing with the Tower of Babel. And that is where we're going to kind of park today, talking about that. So the Tower of Babel, as I mentioned, up here, if you see this, you have the flood, and then you have the Tower of Babel here on the panel over there on my right. So with the Tower of Babel, what was God's command when the people, to Noah and his family, when they got out of the ark? What were they supposed to do? Okay, go forth and multiply. Fill the earth and multiply. Go through and do that. They did not. So if you have your Bibles now, we were in chapter 5. Turn forward a few pages, a few chapters to chapter 11. Chapter 10 is often called the Tablet of Nations. Looking at there, it goes through, and it's the nations that are descendant from Noah. A fascinating read. All right, if you look at that and understand like all the different people groups that came from there, and again, for the sake of time, I would love to go through it, but I can't, of who and the different people groups and even the regions that they ultimately moved to based off of Noah's sons that they had there. But they do a little bit of backtracking here in chapters 10 and 11. Chapter 10, they go through and kind of fast forward through several decades, if not hundreds of years of human history. Then they back up and say, okay, before everybody split up and did that, let's go talk about what happened and had them split up there. When they broke up in the Tower of Babel, some things were supposed to happen before that. So chapter 11, verse 1. It says, now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as the people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said one to another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top to the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. So we see here where they want to start building the Tower of Babel. Now, there's 3 possible explanations for what it's talking about here, why they wanted to build this tower. If you notice here, you do not see right off the bat the most common theory or commonly taught lesson about the Tower of Babel of why they built it. I was taught this when I was in Sunday school. In no way, shape, or form am I looking at it and saying that they were wrong in it, but there is other options, other possibilities. What is the most commonly taught lesson of why the people built the Tower of Babel? What were they trying to do? They were trying to reach the heavens. And the way it was explained to me was they were trying to get to heaven by bypassing God, which is a very likely possibility. They were trying to do that, trying to get to heaven with bypassing God, which is a possibility. Another possibility, though, is that they were creating this tower, they were creating this monument here in a way to worship the heavens and a way to praise the heavens. All throughout ancient societies, we see towers used for this. They feel the closer they are to the heavens, the closer they are to their gods. If this was a little bit older of a group in here, I would discuss a lot of times what the obelisks were used for, and not used for, but representing with human reproduction and what they believed the rain was and all of that there. But I'm not going to go into those details because of the subject matter and the age group here. If you don't know, ask your mother. And so to have there, a lot of the societies did that. And so it could have been similar here with the Tower of Babel, where they were either worshiping gods that they had created, or well, obviously it would have been gods that they created from before the flood. It could have been that they were trying to get to heaven by bypassing God. They still believed in Jehovah. They still believed in God, but they didn't want to do it his way. Or they were simply looking and praising the heavens themselves, what they were doing. Again, not something I'm going to fight somebody on. Just know that there are possibilities there based off of what the Bible says. And we're going to look here. The next picture is a artist rendition of what possibly people believe the Tower of Babel could have looked like. The spiral staircase on the outside is a very common motif or common theme of the Tower of Babel, because back then they wouldn't have had the major cranes and scaffolding that we do today and different things. And so a round tower with the stairs on the outside and gets smaller as it goes to the top would have been very easy to create. One thing, though, to note, when you are looking at historical art of biblical events, is that the era, until really about the 1700s, whatever era the artist was in, that's what they put the people in the artwork in. And so, for instance, if it was a 13th century artist in Italy, then he would have painted the characters of Peter or Paul or Jesus or Noah in 13th century Italian garb. That's what they did there. So we're going to look at the next picture to see that. This is probably one of my favorite pictures of rendition of the Tower of Babel. It's a little bit small, but I'm going to zoom in on some of them. So we'll zoom in a little bit here, and you notice that this in no way looks like Middle Easterners building a tower. Even modern-day Middle Eastern style there. You could see that they have there with the different outfits, the very floppy hats. This guy's got the nice robe, and here almost looks like serfs from medieval Europe that would have done there. So again, keep that in mind, that if you're looking at older artwork of biblical events, they create it based off of what they know. Because what's going on in their mind as that artist, they're reading the story from the scriptures, or they're hearing the story from somebody who could read, and they have never been to the Middle East. They've never seen pictures or individuals there, so they're writing what they know. If we, Sam, go back one slide, actually. Sorry, that's on me. So here, this Tower of Babel, this picture is actually telling the entire story. And we'll go through the picture here. But down at the bottom, as we just saw, it's the men making the bricks. So go ahead and go to that slide. Here, what is the problem? Biblically, this is a biblically inaccurate picture, besides the garb that they're wearing, besides the clothing. But what is wrong with this picture based off of the couple of verses we just read? Okay, yeah, so the monk and the bishop, that definitely wasn't a thing there. So again, they're going with what they knew. So there wouldn't have been monks or bishops there watching and helping. But biblically, based off of the verse we just read, Sam?
I think didn't they say they make bricks?
Exactly. They're milling the bricks in this picture. In the Bible, it says that they made them. They put them in a furnace and created them. Now, does that mean that every single brick was built in a furnace? Most likely not, but looking at this picture, all of the brickwork that they have there is being done that way. So, biblically inaccurate, and I will fight you on that one. All right, so then we move up the tower to the next picture there. You can see they're using cranes and pulleys, which probably would have happened. Most likely, those simple machines would have been around for a very long time as they're doing it. Then we get to the top of the tower, and we see the end of the story. And again, I'll zoom in just a minute, but at the top there, from your distance, it probably looks like eagles. Those are angels that are going and cursing the tongue, making it so they cannot speak the same language. My personal favorite guy in this entire picture is in the next slide. Maybe. No, go ahead to the next. Oh, no, okay, not that one. Go back. All right, but it's this guy right here. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, oh no, I can't talk anymore. This is the end. Woo! Like, no, just because your guy next to you couldn't understand what you were saying doesn't mean you need to, take a step back there, sir. And everything. So again, it's artist's rendition of what he did, and I'm not faulting him. He was going off of what he knew and different things there. But the angels go there, and we see that in verse 6 of chapter 11 says, "And the Lord said, Behold, there are one people, and they all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Now," goes to verse 7, "Come, let us go down and there confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech." So it's really interesting when you think about the reasoning that God had for this in this passage here. Other passages we see that God did this because they were disobeying, they were not spreading throughout the earth, they didn't listen to everything here. But God looked at them and said, be fruitful and multiply, spread throughout the earth, because God knew that if they all stayed in the same location, the same thing that happened before the flood would happen again. God didn't want that to happen. And so he says here, they're all one language. There's nothing impossible. If they put their mind to it, they're going to do it. They're going to figure it out. And God's like, no, that's not what I want to happen. So he messes up their language. He messes it up there. One way that I think we often look at this, and I believe is inaccurate, but again, it's not, it's biblically based, but this is, the Stuart Rogers biblical commentary, is that when God mixed up the languages, he did not make it so that languages were mixed up. I believe that if the way he did it, after they've been there in the land of Shinar for decades, that the individual family groups would have been the language groups that he changed going there. I think that would have been, one, it was already a very traumatic situation. You're standing there, a best friend, not from a family group, that kind of thing, and now you cannot communicate with him. Now, these languages weren't around, but you're speaking English, he's speaking Chinese. It wouldn't have worked, that kind of thing. Not only that, but again, to make it less traumatic as they separated, they would have been with their families. That's my theory. That's my hypothesis, kind of based off of chapter 10, where it specifically talks about the different family groups that would spread out to the different parts of the world. Eventually, as groups spread to different parts of the world, if God just did it, quote unquote, in our eyes, randomly, then they would have become family groups. But based off of chapter 10, I believe that he confused the different groups of families, and then that's where they spread out to the different areas there, which also would have encouraged those family groups to stick together as they moved. Another theory of mine, and this I don't believe we will ever have any type of evidence for this, but if you look at MRI scans of people that speak different languages, different parts, CAT scans, MRIs, those kinds, different parts of the brain are used for different languages. Now, not massive parts. It's not like, the front left and the front right. Not different things there, but different parts light up based off of different things there. And so when God changed their language, that is something that's just incredible. I mean, this is a Sunday school story. This is taught on flannel graph boards to children when they're young, and it's very simple to understand. But as adults, we want to look a little bit deeper and see what God did here. Amazingly, what he did was most likely, again, I believe, and that changed their brain chemistry so that they'd be able to understand these different languages. Because think about what language is as well. What is language? Some of my students have heard me say this before. What is language? Truly, like at its most basic level, what is it? Desmond.
The sound of the word you are speaking means.
Exactly. They said it's the sound of the word you are speaking means. Another way to say that is language is simply meaning given to sound. That's it. It's a very basic level. Now, God created language, but that's what it is. If you hear another person speaking a different language, it's just sounds. And the reason you don't understand it is because you don't know the meaning behind that sound. Whether it is the clicking languages of some of that are out there, or the more harsh guttural ones that are out there, those sounds mean something. My wife wouldn't let me do this, but I really wanted to. When we first got our dog, I wanted to train the dog that the word no was actually positive. The word yes was negative. I wanted to do that. And you can do that, and that's crazy to think about. Because the word no to us means no, because we know that when that sound is made, that is a negative response to whatever is happening there. Dogs don't understand language. As much as you love them and everything, they respond to the sound, to the tone, to things like that. When I play with my dog, so often I'll be rubbing his head and messing with his face, and we're like, "You're so stupid, I hate you so much." And he's like, "This is great." He has no idea what I'm saying, because he doesn't understand language. He just understands tone. And so with our dogs, if my dog was doing something bad, I could look at that dog and say, "Yes, yes!" And the dog eventually would stop doing it. Now, she didn't want me to do that because that would confuse everything about it. But again, and I think this would fall under like Geneva Convention, like violating it, but you could do that with children too, all right? Like you could. The reason spaghetti is because the sound spaghetti means, the noodles and the meat sauce and all this kind of stuff. You could call the noodles and the meat sauce blue and then raise a child to think, "Hey, what's for dinner?" And you say blue, and they're thinking noodles and meat sauce and everything. You can do that. Again, probably a violation of human rights somewhere, so please don't. But you could do that. And so when God changed the languages at the Tower of Babel, that's what he did. He altered their understanding. He altered the way they spoke. He altered everything there so that the sounds that they were now uttering meant something to some people, but not to others. And so the bell just rang on me, and so I've got a few more slides I'm going to go through kind of relatively quickly here. Modern archaeologists, and I tend to agree, believe that the Tower of Babel was not the circular towers that we often see in artwork, but was most likely a fancy word for a temple in the Middle East, specifically Iraq and Iran, called a ziggurat. Ziggurat, I've also heard it pronounced. Tomato, potato, with there. And so this here is actually some U.S. troops several years ago at a rebuilt ziggurat in Iraq. Actually, they believe might even be from the land of Ur. Well, if we look at it, if we go to the next slide, that is kind of a zoomed out picture there. That is something, an idea that the ziggurats, these temples, would have looked like. And that would be a huge undertaking for people before the pre-industrial age. And some there. We don't know how big the tower would have gotten before God confused the languages there. And the question also may be asked, well, why don't we see remnants of it today? Actually, the reason we have this one is because they did find the foundation of a massive ziggurat in the area that we believe is the plain of Shinar. So this may be the location of the original Tower of Babel. We're not sure. But another reason is once the tongues were confused, once the people spread out and everything, there's this giant pile of pre-made bricks over here that nobody's using anymore. Well, I'm not going to let it sit there. I'm going to disassemble that so I can build my house, so I can build my gates, so I can build my fences and everything. And we've seen this through history as well. There was this woman in Egypt during the time of the French occupation, like Napoleon and stuff like that. And he was huge on archaeology, loved the stuff. And this woman, her and her family for decades, had been going to this area. And there was basically like a pile of bricks, and they'd take the bricks, use it for what they wanted there. And then they found these other areas that were kind of like had animal waste and everything. They used that for fertilizer, and they found these scrolls and things like that. They were like, well, let's use that to light our fires with. And they found all these clay tablets, and they're like, well, let's break this apart and use our own tablets. And for decades, her family did that. And then one day, one of these French archaeologists came by and saw, and she unknowingly, her and her family for decades had been raiding a pharaoh's tomb and using the supplies there so that they could survive on their daily life. They had turned mummies into fertilizer. They had taken the bricks that had beautiful mosaics on it and used it to build their fence to keep their animals in, kind of thing. And so my history-loving heart is like, oh, how could you? But at the same time, they needed to survive. And so what happened to the Tower of Babel that's a pretty prevalent theory, is that as time went on, people started to just disassemble it because they could use the bricks elsewhere at a much more profitable opportunity there. And I think we have one more slide there. So this is also an idea of what ancient Ur would have looked like, which we'll talk about next week, beginning to link biblical events and historical world events, different things there, where Abraham came out of. And so, like I said, I've got to stop there. Let me know if you want any other additional information about what we talked about today. Thank you.